Okay, so in continuing with what we've been talking about, we're going to talk today about the character types of Antichrist. So, what I wanted to do, which we've done it a little bit in the past, it's just now we're doing, I guess you could say, a bit more organized and structured, talking about the Antichrist and what that is going to look like. Both the first, what we started out was the spirit of Antichrist, much like the spirit of lawlessness, the spirit of iniquity that's been at work since the beginning. So we kind of talked about that at first, and we moved into talking about false teachers, false prophets, those sort of things. Today I'd like to talk more so about the character types of Antichrist. Now we've hit on a few of these. I'm going to skip Nimrod because I've already hit Nimrod in the past, and I don't want to get, I know we're going to repeat some information, but I don't want to get too repetitive, so we're going to skip Nimrod. What I want to start out is out of Deuteronomy, the 18th chapter, actually. Deuteronomy 18, the 18th verse. I'll give you a second to turn.
Which chapter?
Deuteronomy 18. So Deuteronomy 18:18, it says, I will raise them up a prophet from among their brethren, like unto thee, like Moses, and will put my words in his mouth, and he shall speak unto them all that I shall command him. So we know that one day there's going to come a prophet like Moses. So it gives us as Moses as a character type of what Messiah will be like one day. He will come, it'll be a prophet like Moses. And if you remember at Easter, right around Easter, remember when I did real heavily Christ in the Old Testament, and one of those Sundays, it was when we were still doing video only. One of those Sundays was a comparison and contrast of Moses and Jesus. I don't know if you remember that or not. That's been a few months now, but there's a big comparison between Jesus and Moses. Not to get too far off on a tangent on that, but we know that Joseph is also a Christ character type, and that's even accepted by the rabbis. Even the unbelieving rabbis say Mashiach ben Yosef, somebody that comes in the character of Joseph. And then there's also somebody that comes in the character of David. Even the unbelieving rabbis will believe that, and they also agree to the part with Moses. So, if we look at Jeremiah, this is just a quick pass-by verse, so I don't expect you to turn there. Jeremiah 11:19, sorry. But I was like a lamb or an ox that is brought to the slaughter. So even Jeremiah has some characteristics and types of where he was kind of compared to, where we can see a little parallel of Jesus. And Ezekiel, with his infamous kind of title, with the way that a lot of these prophecies of Ezekiel start. This is chapter 2, verse 1. And he said unto me, Son of man. So even Ezekiel, we see all the prophets are kind of typify Christ in some way or another. Now, the argument I'd like to make is that in the same retrospect, we have character types of the Antichrist. We have character types of Christ. We have character types of the Messiah. So too in the Bible we have character types of what the ultimate fulfillment of anti-false, whichever you would like to say, Messiah will be like. Jesus said there would be many antichrists. There'll be many antichrists. But what we have to do is we have to realize that one of them is going to take the cake. One of them will take the cake. When he talks about false teachers and false Christ, we often kind of tend to go directly to, maybe we don't because I've talked about it so heavily over the last few weeks, but a lot of times people, when they're like false Christ, false teachers, they kind of bring up Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons. I'm not saying that doesn't apply, because it does, but we also know that applies to those that are infiltrating the church as well. And we went into that pretty good last week. If you remember the video I shared, I don't know if did some of you catch the video on Facebook? I know not everybody has Facebook, but I actually shared the video link for the YouTube video that I talked about, where the guy it was on the God channel that he was talking about it. So it's supposed to be a pretty good evangelical platform to reach millions of people. Well, he's sitting there talking, and he's talking about, he says, God, why hasn't the Spirit moved in this place yet? And then he said, the Spirit came over me and said, because you haven't kicked that old lady in the face. And he says he walked over and kicked the old lady in the face. It's pretty bizarre. This is on the God Network, and the God channel, they defended this guy. What's his name? Rick Joyner defended this guy. People that are supposed to know better defended this guy. It's a problem. It kind of, to me, tells me that the church is no longer able to distinguish, or is losing its ability to distinguish false teachers from good teachers. So that's a problem. And we know that ultimately it's the spirit of Antichrist that's at work with that. So, we know that while Jesus isn't primarily scoped on Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons and that sort of thing, we know that he's primarily focused and scoped in and zoomed in on the fact that false teachers are going to infiltrate the church. Now this happened immediately, kind of following towards the end of the days of the apostles, but it's happening in our time as well. So, something to be aware of. It even says that it gets so bad, Lisa mentioned this earlier, that it's so bad that even if it were possible, that the very elect could be deceived. And so that's how tricky some of it will be. Not only do we need to look for this in false teachers, but it's not only the Christians, but somebody has to fool the Jews as well, basically. Somebody has to fool the Jews into thinking they're the Jewish promised Messiah. Remember what Jesus said. He said, another will come in my name, him you will believe. Now we had a little bit of this happen. If you've ever heard of the Bar Kokhba, the Bar Kokhba Revolution or something along those lines. I think it happened around 130 AD, where there was a man, Shimon Bar Kokhba, I think was his name, and he was anointed as the Messiah by a rabbi. And long story short, he wasn't the Messiah, and the rebellion was put down, and he kind of goes down in history as an infamous false Messiah that many Jews fought underneath of to try to expel the Romans. So, Jesus said, another will come in my name, and him you will believe. So somebody has to fool not only the church, but they also have to fool the Jewish people as well into thinking he's their guy. Daniel 11. There's some specific instruction. You say, well, why do I really need to know this? Some people don't like to be burdened down with it. They don't like to study it. They don't like to know it. They think it's intimidating. Why do I need to know this? This is what Daniel 11 says. In the 33rd verse it says, and they that understand among the people shall instruct many. Yet they shall fall by the sword, and by the flame, and by captivity, and by spoil many days. Now when they shall fall, they shall be helping with a little help. But many shall cleave to them with flatteries. He says, you're not going to get much help, and there's going to be a lot that fling to you just in flattery and kind of superficially alone. Some other versions of the Bible say that a little bit more cleaner than what the King James does. And some of them some of them have understanding shall fall to try them and to purge and to make them white even to the time of the end, because it is yet for a time appointed. And 12 says something along similar lines. 12 states this. In the 10th verse, many shall be purified and made white and tried, but the wicked shall do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand. If you've got Jesus in your heart, you're supposed to have wisdom. You're supposed to want to study your Bible. You're supposed to want to learn. All of these things, if Jesus is in your heart, there should be a little bit of a natural desire for you to want to learn more about Him, to get closer to Him. And I know some people like to shun off of it, but it also includes what you would call eschatology study, the study of the end times, those sort of things it would also include. We're supposed to look for it. We're supposed to be ready for it. Otherwise, why would Jesus talk about it? So, there's many historical types of Antichrist that we could go into. If I were to ask you what a historical Antichrist type would be, you'd probably say Hitler. And that'd be a really easy one to pick out really quickly. Hitler, Napoleon, any types of those, but there's also ones that, like when we talked about Hanukkah, that may not be directly in the Bible, but they're prophesied by Daniel, similar to what I just read about, the Antiochus Epiphanes, Epiphanes, however you would like to say it. where he basically deifies himself and he says, "Worship me," and he puts it's where the abomination of desolation happens. He sacrifices the pig on the altar, and we've gone into Hanukkah before, so I won't take up time to do that right now. But the one I want to talk about today is Pharaoh. I want to talk about Pharaoh as a type or figure of Antichrist. Pharaoh was a religious and political leader. We know that Antichrist in a lot of ways will be seen as a religious leader and a political leader as well. Remember, he already has the world deceived. Satan already has the world deceived. If somebody comes in and they have an answer to their economic woes, they're going to say, "Sign me up, buddy, I'm in." It's not going to take much to convince the world. If you have a good plan, if you come in with some economic genius to you or whatever it is, look how quickly people fall in and out of love with political candidates. Every 4 years it happens. They fall in love and out of love with political candidates on a whim. So that shouldn't be anything new. A little bit about Pharaoh. Pharaoh was called the Lord of Two Lands. That was kind of his title. He was the Lord of the Upper and Lower Egypt. Also, one of Pharaoh's titles is this. It was High Priest of every temple. Isn't that an interesting title? High Priest of every temple. Pharaoh was looked upon as a mediator between the gods and the Egyptians. After death, Pharaoh became divine and identified with Osiris, which was the father of Horus, god of the dead. There's some similarities there where we can see a little bit of counterfeit, can't we? A little bit of counterfeit. Whenever someone is deified other than Christ, we know this is a counterfeit. Remember when they were trying to give Paul this credit, and they started to try to worship Paul a little bit. Paul quickly shot it down, because why? Paul wasn't a type of Antichrist. If anything, Paul is a type of Christ, where he's a good teacher, and he teaches us, and he points us to the Messiah. So, Paul says, "Don't look at me." There is an interesting story in Acts, though, in the 12th chapter, where somebody didn't choose to shoot down worship and being deified. In Acts, the 12th chapter, the 21st verse, it says, "And upon a set day, Herod, arrayed in royal apparel, sat upon his throne and made an oration unto them. And the people gave a shout, saying, It is the voice of a God, and not a man." Now, this isn't Herod's fault, per se, that they do this to him. Where Herod is at fault is he doesn't shoot them down. And what does it say next? It's actually pretty terrible. It says, "Immediately the angel of the Lord smote him, because he gave God not the glory, and he was eaten of worms and gave up the ghost." So, there's a lot wrong in being a type and character of what you would say is Antichrist or Anti-Messiah. Ezekiel, the 29th chapter, Ezekiel, the 29th chapter, says something interesting about Pharaoh. Now remember, Pharaoh is a title. You could say maybe sort of an institution. It was a long line of pharaohs in Egypt. In Pharaoh, the 29th chapter, the first 3 verses say this: "In the 10th year, in the 10th month, in the 12th day of the month, the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, set thy face against Pharaoh king of Egypt, and prophesy against him, and against all Egypt. Speak and say, Thus saith the Lord God, Behold, I am against thee, Pharaoh king of Egypt, the great dragon that lieth in the midst of his rivers, which hath said, My river is mine own, and I have made it for myself." So you could tell there's sort of this godlike complex of Pharaoh just by reading that. Now, granted, we're not talking about the same exact Pharaoh as in Pharaoh the man that Moses was dealing with, but it's Pharaoh the institution nonetheless. So, there's some problems with that. There's some problems where Pharaoh has sort of deified himself and looked upon himself as a god and as this powerful being. Now, when we study the Old Testament, we see a lot of things in the Old Testament that say, they kind of point us to, like the Passover points us to the blood of Christ, those sort of things. You know, we look at Moses leaving the Exodus, Moses leaves Egypt. We sort of see Moses going through the river, or through the Red Sea, and going into the Promised Land. We can see that as a type in the New Testament, where Jesus leads us through baptism into heaven. We sort of see those parallels together where our atonement's been paid for, those sort of things. Now, when we look at Egypt, we can look at Egypt as a form of the world. We can look at Egypt as a form of the world, and when we trust in Egypt, it's sort of like saying we're trusting in the world system, we're trusting in what this world has to offer versus what God has to offer us. If you remember, trusting in Egypt becomes sort of a term for backsliding. In Numbers, the 11th chapter, 4th verse, the mixed multitude that was among them fell a-lusting. And the children of Israel also wept again and said, who shall give us flesh to eat? We remember the fish which we did eat in Egypt freely, the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, and the garlic. But our soul is dried away, and there is nothing at all besides this manna before our eyes. They began to look back to Egypt. Looking back to Egypt sort of becomes somewhat of a way to look as backsliding, especially in the days of Isaiah. Isaiah kind of compares it along those lines in Isaiah chapter 30 and 31. 1 through 3, it says, woe to the rebellious children, saith the Lord, that take counsel. But where do they take counsel? Not of me. They look not to me. Where are they looking instead? And that covereth with a covering, but not of my spirit, that they may add sin to sin. That walk to go down into Egypt, and have not asked at my mouth to strengthen themselves in the strength of Pharaoh, and to trust in the shadow of Egypt. Therefore shall the strength of Pharaoh be your shame, and your trust in the shadow of Egypt your confusion. Trusting in Pharaoh, trusting in Egypt, become an allusion to backsliding, don't they? You can sort of see how, again, Pharaoh sort of echoes and typifies the antichrist. There's going to come a time when people no longer trust in God at all, but they will trust in this world, they will trust in what it has to offer them, and they will trust in it to feed them, it to clothe them, it to warm them. They'll trust in those things. Now think about this. This is just something to consider. Those that will probably take the mark of the beast have probably already done so in their heart. Why? They're attached to this world. They can't break away from it. They don't want to break away from it. One of the most simple lines in the entire Bible was said by Jesus himself. And what did he say? He said, remember Lot's wife. 3 words. Remember Lot's wife. But there's a lot in there, isn't there? There's a lot in that in those 3 words. Lot's wife she was in the clear. She was saved. She was safe. All she had to do was do what God told her. But what did she do? She held on. She couldn't let go. She couldn't let go. If you remember, Lot himself, really all in all, was barely rescued because he should have left sooner than what he did. He should have left sooner than what he did. There's danger in attaching ourselves to the world. There's danger in trusting in possessions, and trusting in idols, and trusting in things. The way that God describes it in Revelation that we just read this past week on Wednesday, at the end of chapter 9, he says, and the rest of the men which were not killed by these plagues, yet repented not of the works of their hands, that they should not worship devils, idols of gold, silver, brass, stone, and wood. And what's he say about those things? He said they can't see, nor hear, nor walk. Neither repented they of their murders, their sorceries, their fornication, or their thefts. There's a lot of people that have an attachment to this world. Now we see the Exodus. If you read through chapters, 8 and 9, chapters 8 and 9, there's a big parallel with 8 and 9 and what you would see as with the Egypt and the Exodus. So it's not an uncommon or irrational thing to think about Egypt and the Exodus and Pharaoh and put them in a parallel with the last times. It's not unbiblical, it's not uncommon, and it's not a bad thought, because we see how it uses those descriptions. Chapter 31 says something along the same lines in Isaiah. It says, woe to them that go down to Egypt for help, and stay on horses, and trust in chariots, because they are many, and in horsemen, because they are very strong. But they look not unto the Holy One of Israel, neither seek the Lord. Yet he also is wise, and will bring evil, and will not call back his words, but will arise against the house of the evildoers, and against the help of them that work iniquity. Now the Egyptians are men, and not God, and their horses are flesh, and not spirit. When the Lord shall stretch out his hand, both he that helpeth shall fall, and he that is holpen shall fall down, and they all shall fail together. There'll be a lot of people in the last days that say, Lord, did I not do this in your name? Did I not prophesy in your name? Did I not heal the sick in your name? And what's he going to tell them? He's going to say, depart, I never knew you. Depart, I never knew you. There's a lot of people that even try to bring biblical aspects. They put a little truth next to error, and they've got one foot in the world, and they've got one foot in God. What's he say to, is it Laodicea, about being lukewarm? He says he's going to spit them out. He doesn't like it. He would rather you were hot or cold. If you're lukewarm, he's just going to spit you out. There's a great danger in being attached to Egypt and of being attached to the things of this world. Well, remember what Jesus says. He says, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel, he says, don't come down to the house to get your cloak. He says, just head to the hills. Just head to the hills for safety. How many people do you know, Christians right now, that if God said, you better get to the hills right now, they would be trying to find as many possessions as they could? That would be the equivalent of your house burning down, and you're going in there, and your kids are in there, and you just start throwing out, pictures and things that really, all in all, compared to your life, compared to the life of your family, they don't matter, do they? Those are just possessions. Those are just possessions. They might be special to us. They might have special value. They might have special meaning. But all in all, new pictures can be taken. A new house can be built. But your life, that is, your soul, can't be replaced. Remember what we talked about, those 4 main sins on Wednesday, and how guilty America is of these things. Murders, sorceries, fornication, theft. How guilty America is of those things. How many people have you known that have sold themselves out so cheap? There's the people that have sold themselves out to a certain lifestyle, but they're millionaires, so if they're going to sell themselves out, at least they did something, I guess. But then there's people that just sell themselves out so cheap. They sell themselves out so cheap so they could get drugs, so they could get alcohol, whatever it might be. They give it all away. They give God away just for a momentary pleasure, just for something that doesn't last, for something that can't speak to them, for something that can't hear them, for something that can't walk with them. But what's God? He says He can walk with us, He can hear us, and He can see us. You tell me how something is going to protect you that can't see, that can't hear, and can't walk. That's not going to offer very good protection for you, is it? But God offers an abundance of protection. Not necessarily in this world alone, but God offers protection in the next life. If you will choose His Son, if you'll choose Jesus, if you'll choose to follow Him, if you'll choose to reject the world, then guess what? God can see, God can hear, God can walk, and He uses all of those abilities to help us out each and every day. He'll show you He's worth it. Don't sell yourself out. There's no price on earth that's worth being sold out. There'll come a time where you're either going to be sold out to Christ or you're going to be sold out to the world. I'd rather be a slave to Christ than a slave to this world system. You're going to be a slave. That's kind of like somebody made the joke. They said, it's an odd thing for Christians to be calling people that wear masks sheep. Now, You know, disagreements on mask wearing is another thing. But here's the thing, is that you're all sheep. The question is who's your shepherd? Is your shepherd Jesus? Is your shepherd this world? We're all slaves to something. But are you a slave to Christ? As Paul says, he's a servant. Or as it says in some translation, a slave to Christ. Or are we a slave to this world system? If you're attached to valuables, if you're attached to monetary things, if you're attached to material things, then that's not where we're supposed to be. But guess what? It's not too late. We still got time to fix that. If you have a need to pray, come up and pray. But as we go throughout the rest of what we're talking about, we're going to go through some more types of antichrist before we're kind of done on this topic. Choose Jesus today. Choose Jesus today. Reject the world. Reject Egypt. Reject the help that it has to offer. Because what does he say to them? He says, Egypt will basically be your downfall. He says, and your trusting in Egypt is like trusting in a shadow. It can't help you. It may look big. It may look spooky. It may look dark. But it's not going to help you. Because once you get in it, you realize it's just a shadow and it's not that bad. As we get a song.
3:24.